How hard is it to catch 5 tournament caliber bass with no help, no practice on a public body of water? Let's find out. Today I'm on Beaver Lake in Arkansas. It's early November and water temperatures are in the mid-60s. Fall fishing on Beaver Lake is extremely difficult, and in local tournaments this time of year, there's usually only 1 to 2 bags over 15 pounds out of 100 boats. This means I need to focus on quality, not quantity on this trip. If you saw my prep video I posted earlier this week, I talked about my plan to focus on main lake flats and docks where the water had less than 3 feet of water visibility. I marked several isolated rock piles, old house foundations, and brush piles you could see in a historical view of Google Earth when the lake was drawn down. I started my morning by running several of these isolated objects and started getting bit pretty quickly. On my first stop, I caught a largemouth that was a 1/4 inch short of the legal limit. I then moved to an underwater house foundation and lost a solid 2.5 pounder.
There we go. Oh, jumped off.
You can see this house foundation on my 360 imaging. It was in about 7 feet of water and I lost it on a Megabass Super-Z Z2 200 crankbait. Losing a single fish is not a big deal, and I was more optimistic than frustrated because the fish I lost was the size I was looking for. Therefore, I tried to replicate this area further up the lake using the waypoints I made on Google Earth in my prep video. The first area I tried was a boring looking bank with no obvious rock cover above the water. However, if we look under the water with Google Earth, you can see big boulders in 4 to 8 feet of water. Here's another look at them using 360 imaging. In this image, you can actually see a bass in the shadow of one of these boulders. Because I lost my last fish on a crankbait, I started with a jig, but didn't get bit. I then switched back to the AttaX 200 crankbait and lost a 2 3/4 pounder halfway back to the boat.
Got him. Here we go, good one. Stay on there, fish. Oh, golly, pulled off. Crap.
The conditions were not great for a crankbait, bluebird skies and no wind. But for some reason, I could only generate a quality bite on a crankbait. As the day progressed, I tried a jig, a shaky head, and a swing head, but only got small bites. On the other hand, the crankbait was getting bigger bites, but they were just grabbing the back hook, then throwing it when they came to the surface. I ended up losing another solid keeper on the crankbait after changing colors and putting on new hooks. I knew the crankbait wasn't my best option, but I couldn't figure out any other way to trigger a quality bite in that moment. At the same time, I was running out of offshore boulders to fish. There weren't that many in the correct depth range for this fishing trip. I found 12 boulders in that 4 to 8 foot depth range, which resulted in 3 lost keepers on the crankbait, 2 short fish on a shaky head, and several other bites I didn't connect with. In total, I lost 4 keepers that would have gone around 9 pounds from those isolated boulders in the house foundation I started the day on. Really quick, for those who enjoy our content and want to support us further, head to our website, fishthemoment.com. Then go to the Support Fish the Moment page. Here you'll find a link to our Patreon page. I don't talk about this very often, but Patreon is a place where you can actually give us a monthly donation to help support the free YouTube content we put out both on the Fish the Moment YouTube channel and our live streams over on Fish the Moment Live. All Patreon members get their names in the credits of every video, and some tiers also get discounts on our website, fishthemoment.com. I want to give a huge shout out to all of our current and past Patreon members who help us weather the fluctuating YouTube ad rates. Without your support, we wouldn't be able to focus on providing high quality, free content here on YouTube. Thanks again to all of our amazing supporters. Now back to the video. Okay guys, so I'm back here in my garage and I've had about 4 or 5 days to process this bad start to my fishing day. And a lot of guys may just chalk up this bad start to bad luck. Losing 4 fish in a row is not something that normally happens, and honestly I've had a pretty good streak going of not losing very many fish in my videos. However, today was different, and again, you could just say I had a bad luck or a bad day, but I don't really think about fishing that way. I usually think about fishing as a set of factors that you can somewhat control, especially your equipment. And if something's wrong in that equation with your equipment, your bait, your line, something like that, it's going to cause you to lose more fish than you should. In this scenario, I immediately started recognizing that this Deep X200 and this matte white finish was getting a lot of short strikes in the back hook. So I tried to make some adjustments to maybe get those fish to eat this bait a little bit better. The first adjustment I made was to change up to a little bit more translucent color on that crankbait. This is more of a natural green with some translucency to it. And usually that will help get a few extra bites and get the fish to commit to it better. I also changed out the stock treble hooks on this bait to Gamakatsu EWG size 4 hooks. By changing out the treble hooks and getting a more translucent color, I thought I would maybe be able to get those fish in the boat better as well. Unfortunately, I still ended up losing 2 more fish after changing to this crankbait. And like I mentioned earlier, I was trying to throw baits like a jig, football jig, I threw a Carolina rig, a shaky head, all those slow moving baits, and I wasn't able to get any bigger fish to commit, even though I got a few bites. Therefore, I was kind of at a loss and really wasn't thinking straight because of the frustration of losing fish. I was feeling that time pressure. I only had 3 or 4 hours left in the day. And on Beaver Lake, when you're losing quality fish, you're not in a good spot because there's not that many quality bites out there to be had. So in my kind of haste, my paranoia, I wasn't thinking as straight as I probably should have been on the lake. And that probably happens to a lot of anglers when they're under time pressure. One thing I probably should have done, rather than just changing out the color and the hooks on the same exact profile crankbait that I was throwing, I should have changed crankbaits that I was fishing. And that seems like a very obvious change, but in the moment it wasn't that easy. And I'm sure you guys have experienced that before too. Hindsight's 20/20, and now 4 or 5 days after the trip, it's obvious that I should have made some different changes. And I want to go through some of the changes that I probably should have made on the water, and they may not have made a difference. I may have not landed any of those fish anyways, but at least it gives you an idea of what I would have done if I was thinking a little bit more clearly. First thing I would do is probably change the profile of the baits I'm fishing and go to a little bit lighter line. I was throwing this crankbait on a 7'2" medium heavy crankbait rod. It has a parabolic bend, but it's a little bit heavier rod. And by putting that bait on 12-pound test, I was able to get this bait down that 4 to 8 foot zone very effectively. However, I probably could get a similar bait, a crankbait, into that zone using a spinning rod with 6 to 8 pound test. But instead of having to throw a medium diving crankbait that dives 8 to 12 feet to get down that 8 foot zone, I may have been able to throw a little bit smaller bait. This is a bait that Randy has got me hooked on ever since fishing with him up shallow. It's the Megabass Super-Z Z2 crankbait. It's this little tiny crankbait. It dives down to 8 feet, especially if you're throwing it on 6 and 8 pound tests in the spinning rod. This little crankbait is an absolute fish catcher, and the really frustrating thing is I actually had this exact rod rigged up in the boat, and I thought that maybe if the fish weren't biting that crankbait, I could pick up this little finessey crankbait and catch him. For whatever reason, I just didn't pull it out of the box, and I just kept forcing that crankbait bite. And it's kind of like the gambler's fallacy, where you always kind of disregard what's happened in the past, and you think that the next bite's gonna be the one that gets in the boat, and that you're just running into a bunch of bad luck. But from my experience with fishing, I'm not that much of a gambler, so I can't give you advice there, but definitely on the fishing side, if you're losing fish on a crankbait like this over and over again, especially if you're changing colors, changing hooks, and nothing's working, it's usually the profile of the bait more so than all those other smaller factors. So maybe going to that Megabass Super-Z Z2, that smaller crankbait. You could also throw like a little Striking Series 3. There's a bunch of baits this size that work really well. That may have been one option. There are a few other options for crankbaits I also had in the boat that I probably should have been trying, and honestly, once I lost the first couple of fish, I should have been changing up crankbait profiles and sizes to get those fish going. The other crankbait that I had in the boat that I should have tried is this new SPRO Little John DD45. It's a somewhat flat-sided crankbait. It dives down to 8 to 10 feet, and it looks absolutely awesome. I actually picked them up at the tackle shop and haven't thrown them yet, and I should have just tied it on and thrown it, but again, hindsight's 20/20, didn't get that through my head. Another crankbait I've had a lot of success on in that same depth zone is the KVD 1.5 flat by Strike King. Dives 6 to 8 feet. It kind of casts like a potato chip. It's really light, so I don't really like throwing it that much. anymore just because it's so hard to cast, but it is a fish catcher, and maybe even paired up with that spinning rod, I would have had a deadly combo right there. If you've noticed though, the baits I'm going to are either smaller in size, so the actual length of the crankbait is smaller compared to that Deep X200 I started with, or I'm going to more of a flat-sided crankbait. The Deep X200 kind of has a bulging sides to give it a wide wobble. That KVD 1.5 flat has flat sides, which gives it a narrower wobble. This Deep X200 doesn't have a super wide wobble anyways because it has that narrow bill, so it's not like a super wide wobbling crankbait, but it has more action than the flat side crankbaits. Now, obviously I could have also tried the other categories of baits, and one that I thought of immediately now as I was starting to prepare for this video is a jerkbait. I don't know why I didn't throw a jerkbait. Again, I just kind of got caught up in the moment, and I think I may have thought about it in the moment and thought, okay, bluebird skies, no wind. If they're not committing to a crankbait, why would they be committing any better to a jerkbait, especially when it's not moving that fast? I don't know why I didn't give it a shot at least and try it, and it's probably something I should have done, throwing like a Megabass Vision 110 or maybe like a Smithwick Rogue that goes a little bit shallower. But basically, I just kind of missed the ball on this as well. And again, if I was going back out there, I think that I may have been able to at least land a few more fish and kept down that pattern with a different style bait. In addition, if I had changed up to a jerk bait over a crankbait, I may have been able to re-fish the same boulders that I was fishing throughout the day and get more bites. One thing I noticed is while I was going through these flats with these boulders, I would see 1 to 2 fish on each boulder when I would see them on the 360 imaging or on side imaging. There were more fish around the boulders, I feel like, maybe 5 or 6 fish. There weren't like big schools, but I feel like maybe after getting the first bite on that crankbait, those fish got a little bit shy to it. I only got 1 bite per boulder. But if I went to a different profile bait, maybe like a suspending jerk bait, I may have been able to trigger an additional bite. And it's just something I wasn't thinking of in the moment. I just thought I need to find more boulders, keep fishing, keep throwing that crankbait, and eventually I'll get one in the boat. Not a great decision-making process there, but hey, when you're on the lake, you gotta make the best decisions you can, and at the time, that was all I knew. Back on the lake, things weren't looking good. Given how tough beaver fishes in November, it's almost impossible to come back from losing 4 quality fish with only 2 hours left in the day. I was also running out of areas to look for more boulders, so my only hope was to find a new pattern on a new type of cover or structure. Given the sunny, calm conditions, my first instinct was to fish shallow boat docks. I started on a stretch of main lake docks and got a big bite on the second dock I fished. I set the hook and it came off halfway to the boat.
Got him. Oh no! Oh, that was a big one. My jig hook is bent.
I've caught a lot of jig fish on boat docks over my life, and I'm pretty sure it was over 4 pounds if it was a bass. After getting my jig back, I realized my hook had been bent in on the same cast I got my bite after I skipped the jig too hard into a plastic dock float. As many of you know, I don't fish up shallow that often, so my skipping skills have deteriorated over the years. This lack of practice resulted in a hard collision with that plastic dock float, and it cost me a good fish. Don't worry, there was no property damaged in that skipping accident, but I did bend down that hook, which is pretty unfortunate.
Now, unlike the crankbait scenario where I lost the fish because I had the wrong profile of bait, I had the right profile of jig. I had the right jig on. I even had a pretty stout hook in this finesse flipping jig by Jewel. Problem was my execution on the casting side. And this is another thing that a lot of guys might blame on bad luck. You're just having a bad day, bad luck, and just chalk it up to that and move on. But I know from experience that the more you blame things on luck in fishing, the worse you're going to be long term, because you're not going to look for ways to improve your fishing, look for ways to make yourself better next time. For example, if I'm going to be throwing a jig and I hit a boat dock really hard and I feel like I may bend out that hook just because I made a bad cast, I need to immediately reel in that jig, check my hook, then cast back in there and make a second approach, rather than just risk it by letting that jig fall to the bottom and then having that hook bent in, and then I end up losing a quality fish. Unfortunately, I didn't get any more good bites on the boat docks either. The boat dock pattern on Beaver Lake is very, very tricky. I've caught them up the river there in the summertime before, and usually you have to fish 20 or 30 docks at times to get one quality bite. It's one of those ways I go to catch a quality kicker fish. It's not the best for catching numbers of fish. I did catch a couple small Kentuckys that didn't keep, caught a couple bluegill even on this jig. There's a bunch of brim and bluegill underneath the boat docks, but I just wasn't able to put the numbers I needed in the boat with the jig pattern. That wouldn't have been too big of a deal though if I had put those other 4 keepers in the boat that jumped me off on the crankbait. I actually ended up getting 5 keeper bites on Beaver Lake in November, and if that fish under the dock was a bass, which it may have not been a bass, I didn't see it, but let's just say it was for the sake of the video, and it was a 3 to 5 pounder plus those 4 fish that I actually did see jump on the surface that would have gone around 9 pounds, I would have been looking at somewhere between, let's say, 12 to 14 pounds for 5 fish, which would have been a very good bag on beaver. I would have been in the top 10 in any tournament, probably top 5 in any tournament, no doubt. And I feel very good about the decisions I made, about my areas and the places I was looking. That really gives me confidence going forward in these Catch 15 challenges, that I know where I'm looking. The thing I need to really be focusing on more though is the equipment that I'm using. In my last prep video, I talked about both my areas and my equipment, and for the equipment I used a variety of bait categories, jigs, shaky heads, crankbaits, things like that, but I didn't prepare to have different profiles within those categories. I didn't have a flat side crankbait and maybe a wider wobbling crankbait, or a smaller crankbait and a bigger crankbait. That's something I do need to take into account going forward in these challenges. And even if I don't have them all on the deck of the boat, I need to have them in the rod box so I can quickly make those adjustments. That's the only way I'm going to be able to consistently catch these 15-pound bags of fish, or even get close. I mean, these challenges, if I don't catch 15 pounds every week, that's not a big deal, especially on the lakes I'm fishing with no practice. But if I can at least get a limit, 10 to 12 pounds, I'm still pretty happy with that. But even to achieve that, I need to really dial in both my areas and my baits. So hopefully going forward, I can get that combination right. I'm sure I'm gonna have days where my areas are wrong, and I'm gonna have days when my baits are wrong, but you guys will be able to follow every single step of the way through these Catch 15 videos. And if you want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming Catch 15 challenges, subscribe to the Fish Moment YouTube channel. And also, if you're still here and you're watching through this entire video, I would really appreciate if you leave a like down the video. It's the best way to make the YouTube algorithm recognize my channel, and it shares out the videos to more people. And really, if you guys aren't liking the videos don't get very many views at all. So if you really want to support the channel in a free and easy way, just go down, hit that like button. It's super simple and it really helps me out. So thanks again for checking out this video, guys. We'll see you all next one.